case of Polish-German reconciliation, maybe one Latin American or Southern African case, but before we take our distance from our conflict, our first meeting, and I owe a lot to Mr. Jaroslav Hrycak, he will be leading us through our conflict. So before going away and taking distance, we want to zoom or to take a close look at this conflict. And we want all other participants to have a background picture of what is currently taking place in Ukraine and how we can formulate questions about peace building. Who is building peace with whom and against whom? So how these issues are being formulated in our context. And this is the background. From tomorrow and up to the next forthcoming months, we will be starting to get estranged from our conflict and take distance. Before I pass the floor to Mr. Hrycak, I would like to invite to say some greeting words to Daria Vitrenko, who is coordinator of projects in Kharkiv office of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. Daria, the floor is yours. Thank you. I'm happy to greet all of you from the Kharkiv office of Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. We are a German foundation that is very close to the Christian Democratic Union. It's entitled by the name of the first federal chancellor. We've been working in Ukraine over 25 years, and in 2017 in Kharkiv, we opened our second office, and it was in response to the specific challenges that the east of Ukraine and the state of Ukraine as such is currently facing. Just because we are convinced that peaceful and prospering Ukraine is a necessary condition for stability and security in the European region. At the same time, we are quite aware of the fact that the peace in Ukraine is unachievable through just warfare. We can achieve peace only when justice, human rights will become available to everybody who has been tortured by war. When Ukrainians on both sides of the front line will be able to have a mature dialogue between themselves over this tragedy, and reintegration of people from the occupied territories for which we are striving, in our mind, has to be based on the principles of democracy, human rights, and Christian values that we all share. Church and religious organizations in general among Ukrainians have been always famous for high level of authority, and they have been always participants of such processes. And starting with humanitarian aid, spiritual support of the faithful people, and finishing with very complicated tasks, including academic tasks, documenting, processing, and analyzing such processes, exchange with international cases. This is the task that we have together with the Ecumenical Institute of Institute of Ecumenical Studies, and this is their initiative, and I'm very grateful to our colleagues for organizing this discussion, for expressing this interest in this discussion, and I am sure that it will be extremely useful, interesting, fruitful, and enriching for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daria. And thus, just as Daria said, we look at this project not as a possibility to teach others, but to get taught ourselves, to teach ourselves. From the perspective of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, how can we join what is happening in Ukraine? And also to put the Ukrainian case in one line with other cases and to comparative perspective. Professor Jaroslav Hrycak We are honored to have him as a speaker opening this project. Professor Hrycak is a historian, is a current professor of the Ukrainian Catholic University. He is a kind of historian who dedicated a lot of time and effort and energy to complicated pages of Ukrainian history. And I think he is, in a way, an ideal Ukrainian to introduce us into this topic. He has been dealing with issues of nationalism, and from the historical point of view, and also from the perspective of religious, theological, Christian context. He has been dealing with difficult issues of Ukrainian-Polish relations and Ukrainian-Jewish relations, the issues of Holocaust. He is member of the Ukrainian-German Historical Commission that is reviewing Second World War and the issues of memory. That's why I think we could hardly find a better speaker for today. So, Mr. Yaroslav, thank you for being with us. The floor is yours. Please don't forget to switch on your mic. Thank you, Pavlo, for such a wonderful introduction. I do not deserve it, but still it's a pleasure to hear it. Nobody is ideal, and I am neither. I will speak not from the point of view of a historian, but from the point of view of a practitioner, someone who started to achieve peace. I will use two cases, one successful and another one a complete failure. I participated in both cases, so I know them from the inside. And these cases are tightly connected with the Ukrainian Catholic University that I represent. But I will start from the general historical overview. I'm looking through a book and reading the book by Azar Agata, a history of wars. And there is this very simple statement there. We all know instinctively this thesis, but still I will say it. Warfare conflicts are a normal part of history. So peace building is not a norm, it's just a product of the last 70 years. This is what happened in Europe after the Second World War. That's why we have to speak about completely concrete, particular historical circumstances. My technical circumstances are not the best at the moment. That's why I'm not able to share with you my presentation, but I sent it to you. So if anyone would like to anyone would like to look through it, you are welcome. The reconciliation is a very fresh historical product that was born under very specific historical circumstances. We can do a concept transfer into our discussion. Ukrainian reconciliation. Historians say, in half joking, that Polish-Ukrainian war is the longest war in European history. If we take hundreds of the last years, that Volodymyr went to Cherlensky cities and occupied them. So they were under Poland. So we can speak about more or less 1,000 years of Ukrainian-Polish conflict, of course, rather conditionally. We can also compare it with the Polish-French conflict, because this is a conflict that is not just local conflict. It creates and programs a certain atmosphere for the area in Europe. So Polish-Ukrainian conflict, and then Russia. Russia was another producer of conflicts. Those who remember Poltava, poem Poltava by Pushkin, he says that the biggest horror of the Russian Empire is that when Kiev gets reconciled with Warsaw. But if to speak about the biggest obstacle in Polish-Ukrainian relations is not the Volodymyr's trip. It's the first. It's a Ukrainian-Polish war for Lviv in November 1918. It was not long, but it was famous for anti-Jewish pogroms. As one historian says, it colored the conflicts between three nations: Ukrainians, Poles, and Jews. The second conflict was much bloodier. It's Volyn in 1943, and the so-called action Vistula, when Ukrainians and Poles were mixed and many Ukrainians were resettled into the western areas of present-day Ukraine. And Jerzy Giedroyc, the editor of the journal Kultura, who in 1951 offered that we have to acknowledge that Vilnius belongs to Lithuania and Lvov belongs to Ukraine. And the doctrine of Giedroyc later became the basis for relations between Warsaw and Kiev. And Poland was the first country to recognize Ukraine's independence. The president Wałęsa and Jacek Kuroń and Adam Michnik, they three signaled and made Poland the first country to recognize Ukraine as an independent country without any pretensions, without any sadness regarding territorial losses, unlike Russia did. The first test of this formula was in the cemetery of so-called Orląt cmentarz in Polish, or Eagles Cemetery. It was a very pompous cemetery organized by Poles to commemorate the soldiers who died in 1918 fighting for Lviv. And then we started renovating this cemetery. Ukrainians considered it as a humiliation, and Lviv local authorities did not allow for the renovation. And even the politicians addressing these authorities didn't help. Even Yushchenko, who was the president, who was famous in Halachina, and Jacek Kuroń, who is, by the way, was born in Lviv, one of the initiators of Polish solidarity. These all efforts didn't help. It may sound funny, but they were discussing the figure of lion, whether it should be lion sitting or lion walking. Lion walking is a Ukrainian symbol, lion sitting is a Polish symbol. It's funny to remember now, but they were discussing this. And they finally met a dead end. The situation had no solution. And then a group of intellectuals from Lviv, we decided what to do. We were following the formula of Ukrainian, Polish, German reconciliation, and we offered to organize a religious ceremony in the cemetery with the Ukrainian, Polish, and Jewish religious leaders, where everybody was supposed to say, we forgive you and we apologize. And it happened in 2002 on the 1st of November. This meeting was very successful. We gathered intellectuals from Poland and from Ukraine. There were no politicians participating in this meeting. And we had this common prayer. And everybody pronounced this phrase, we apologize and we forgive you. And Jacek Kuroń was slowly dying from cancer. He came to Lviv for the first time after war, because he was the one born in Lviv. He died after that in a couple of months. And this event happened to be very successful because all the tension fell down. There were no discussions about the cemetery. Nobody even remembers this now. And for many of us, it seemed to be the biggest achievement of our lives. We designed this formula and we wanted to offer it for another case. And this is the case of reconciliation between Ukraine and Poland regarding the events in Volyn. Volyn is a very ferocious destruction of people on both sides. Armia Krajowa from the Polish side and the Ukrainian insurgent army from Ukrainian side. And this was the biggest amount of victims. Polish families were destroyed in one of the villages, and in village Seherin, where Ukrainian families were killed. And we wanted to create the same scheme. So, of course, we wanted to move this to Volyn. We selected Lutsk University as a venue. The action took place. It was much mentioned in media, but it was a complete failure. Of course, mass media presentation always is looking for something interesting, something tasty. But the key phrases were not pronounced on either of the two sides, because neither of the two sides was eager to say, "Forgive us," and "we forgive you." This somehow got stuck in their throats, and they were not able to pronounce it. We were aware that without the churches, reconciliation was not possible. The situation in Volyn is much more complicated than the situation in Halachina, because Greek Catholic Church in Volyn is one of the few marginal churches there, and the role of Greek Catholic Church could not be the leading one. At the same time, Volyn is the area of Protestant churches. This was helpful, but the most important was Kiev Patriarchate of the Orthodox Church. Everything started from huge issues. The local bishop of Kiev Patriarchate, Mikhail, flatly refused to make service on the Polish cemetery. He said that this is in contradiction with the law of Kievan Orthodox Church, and all the victims in that area were from the Polish side, Catholics. You can see it on the slides from my presentation. It was a kind of one-man show. If you see how it happened in Lviv and how in comparison it happened in Lutsk, you will see that in the first case, everybody was achieving reconciliation. Everybody was trying to get forgiveness and to forgive. While in the second case, you will see that all the publicity, all the public present there was just secular, and it was a situation of pathos, and it never came to humility. There was a long discussion in Lutsk University, and the discussion ended that both sides said, "We have nothing to apologize for." And then the participants went to Seherin, where Ukrainian graves were, and it ended with common prayer, but the words of forgiveness were not uttered. So I provided you with two cases, one very successful and another one a complete failure. I think it's a good comparison because it gives us space for teaching, because we can learn not only on successful cases, but also on failures. What conclusions can we make from my speech? Let's remember that historical memory is not history. Historical memory is a biased history. The ungrounded understanding of history is the good ground for nations. If you speak truth about history, you become a threat for nation or for nationality formation. And that's why when you talk about reconciliation, there is no sense so much to speak about history, but rather chances for reconciliation go up when we talk about historical memory. So the story about Ukrainian-Polish relations now looks better. The situation looks much better than it used to be. But in the recent years, we can all feel a so-called dead end. I am convinced that neither Ukrainian nor Polish society is ready to speak about reconciliation, especially when we talk about the war of 1943 and the Volyn slaughter. I can only compare, and the conclusion made of this is that the reconciliation activities that are initiated from down, from grassroots, have much more success than the initiatives of reconciliation from up, from the officials. If we counted on Kuchma and Kwasniewski, the then presidents of respectively Ukraine and Poland, that could have been a complete failure either. So the idea behind is that the reconciliation can work when it is a civic initiative. And what else I would like to say is number 3, conclusion. The reconciliation that came after the war appeared in the Christian world. Let's remember that the creators of German-French reconciliation were active Catholics. So German-French reconciliation had an active Christian dimension. We were aware when we were appealing to this dimension, when we were talking about Volyn, we are sure that without this dimension, there is no reconciliation possible. There must be something that has a metaphysical dimension. This common prayer, common forgiveness and asking for forgiveness is metaphysical. That's why I have my own opinion, my subjective opinion. So if you do not agree with my subjective opinion, I apologize for this formulation ahead of time. But I think that the idea of reconciliation appeared in Western Christian world. I don't know in practice. The fact that I don't know doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I haven't heard about such reconciliation in the Eastern Christian Church. And this is one of the problems that we will be facing in Ukraine in the nearest future, when we will have to pronounce forgiveness and prayers in case of Ukrainian war. I was speaking about this ahead of time, ahead of 2013 and 2014. I was saying a lot of times, and it was also the idea by Gedritz, that you cannot have reconciliation if there is no reconciliation between the neighbors. There should be a third party. But as the Poles sing in a song, the tango dancing requires two. Now it is thought that the language of reconciliation is just the language of weakness. But this also is true for our Orthodox churches. I apologize if I accidentally abuse or accuse someone, but I don't have this practice. I don't have this idea that the Eastern Christian churches have passed through this experience, the experience that appeared after the Second World War in the 50s and in the 60s. And I think that the Ukrainian-Russian reconciliation is, before it happens, we have to witness Ukrainian reconciliation. Of course, it has to bear a secular character. There is no way to avoid it. But I cannot imagine it without the participation of churches, without the metaphysical spirit, so to say. This reconciliation is unlikely to be sustainable without the churches. And this is where I put a full stop to my brief introduction. Thank you. Thank you, Yaroslav. Thank you, Mr. Herzog, for your speech, for your presentation, and for trying to unite, to combine history nowadays and the issues of reconciliation from the grassroots and from the official ups. And you raised a couple of significant issues. I think we have time for questions, comments, to start the discussion. That's why I kindly invite you to raise hands. You all have special button that you can press. It gives you an opportunity to show raised hand, or you can ask your questions in the chat. Why? You are welcome to ask questions. Also, I'd like to welcome our Ukrainian and foreign participants. I can see Professor Thomas Bremer from Münster University. I will pass the floor to him. Regina Elsner from Zoe Center in Berlin. Also Piotr Kopitz from Lublin University. Adam Seligman, Professor Adam Seligman from Boston University. In USA, Professor Yaroslav Skira from Toronto University in Canada. Also representatives from Hakima University. I can see Mr. Ihor Kozlovsky. Also, I see Georgi Kovalenko and Father Andriy Nahirnyak and many other acquaintances of ours, friends and partners who work in the sphere of peace building. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Ja budu rozmawiati angielsku. I will speak in English, it's easier for me. I have a question concerning the last statement you made, and I saw on your slides, Jetsu, you said so you have the impression that non-Catholic churches lack traditional language of reconciliation. In your presentation, you did not say non-Catholic, but Western Christian world. But anyway, my question is, what makes you so optimistic that churches have or can have a positive impact on reconciliation processes? When I look at cases which I think I know a little bit better, I have, like for example, the Balkans, where I have been involved very much, or Northern Ireland, then you can, if you try to look soberly and objectively to the case, you will see that Western churches, the Catholic Church in both cases, and also Protestant churches, sometimes more in Ireland because they're not present, almost not present in the Balkans, play a very negative role and a very difficult role. So I think, and when you look, for example, to the Middle East, as far as I see it, you have quite good, for example, in the Patriarchate, in the realm of the Patriarchate of Antioch, you have Eastern churches which have very, very good, or which build up very good relations to Muslims and to Jews and helped to contribute. So these are Eastern churches which contributed to reconciliation processes. So it seems to me, and that's my question, isn't this the concrete situation much more important? So of course the Orthodox in the Middle East are a small minority. They live among a majority of Muslims or in Israel of Jews. And then you are in a different situation than when you are the majority church, like Catholics in Croatia, or like as it happened to be for Protestants in Northern Ireland. So set concrete societal circumstances, it seems to me, are much more important for the reconciliation processes than a concrete Western or Eastern Christian tradition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I respond in English? I'm not talking about the rule. I'm talking about certain tendency. And the tendency which is based on my experience and experience as a historian, as also someone who's participating in this reconciliation, without a doubt, the Western Catholic Church, Western churches also could be very kind of bellicose to each other, and they work for the conflict rather against the conflict. That goes without saying. What I'm saying thing is that based on our experience, we don't see the other side so far. So far, we don't see the other side, mostly on the Russian Orthodox Church, that it has a language of reconciliation. My guess is, and this is a guess only, probably doesn't matter, doesn't have that much to do with the Christian Church per se, because I believe Christian Church, if this is a Christian church, has a message, and the message is making peace. It's a very Christian, so to say, very Christian message, coming from the Jesus Christ, from the Bible. My guess is that it has more to do with a certain historical experience. And the experience is that reconciliation occurs in the Western Europe in the 50s, 60s, right after the war, Second World War, in very concrete situation. We didn't have it here under the Soviet Union and the communist system, probably with the exception of Polish and German bishops. What we lacked certain experience of this reconciliation, being under the Soviets. So I'm not blaming the churches per se. I'm not talking about the church beyond the realm of the Soviet Union. I'm talking about very concrete situation of eastern part of our world, Eastern Europe, so to say.
Окей, дуже дякую. Тепер
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Oleg Turi, Professor Oleg Turi, and then we'll be speaking Stephen from Hickman University.
Дуже дякую, Павле, дуже дякую, Ярославе.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Yaroslav. I will be speaking in Ukrainian. It's more comfortable and much faster for me.
І добре, що є така можливість, що хтось перекладає. Це завжди краще. Отже, мій коментар буде стосуватися, власне, того нелегкого питання, яке порушив професор Грицак, і на яке відреагував мій колега Томас Бремер, якому питання, це, так би мовити, чи залежить роль ставлення до процесу примирення, характер тієї чи іншої конфесії, так? Ну і теза, яка прозвучала, що західно-християнський світ, ті конфесії, які ми асоціюємо з Заходом, вони якби мають тут більше і досвіду, і більше відкритості. Я думаю, що справді набагато більше все залежить від констеляції і від суспільно-політичного контексту. Коли ми говоримо про західні конфесії, ми насамперед розуміємо, що вони живуть в цьому середовищі післявоєнної Європи, де були певні, так би мовити, засади, принципи співіснування, де церкви були дистанційовані від політичної влади і де вони, так би мовити, мали можливість виконувати ту роль, на яку вони мають претендувати, тобто насамперед духовну, не так політичну роль. Ми бачимо, що в східній частині Європи церкви незалежно від конфесії, вони залишаються значною частиною як, скажімо так, функціонування політичного механізму, так і певних політичних впливів, не кажучи вже про їх тісний зв'язок із національними справами, національними інтересами, чи просто кажучи, з націоналістичними настроями. І я просто маю конкретний приклад. Знову ж таки, також не хочу нікого ображати, але я брав участь у цих і переговорах, і підготовці певних документів, які стосувалися польсько-українського примирення, які до значної міри були ініційовані Блаженнішим Любомиром Гузаром, і з польського боку була відповідна реакція, але дуже добре пам'ятаю, що найбільшу опозицію щодо цього процесу чинили римо-католики, які були в Україні. І, напевно, тому, що в них був інший контекст, напевно, тому, що вони мали інші політичні преференції. Ну і відомо, якою є позиція навіть по сьогоднішній день Римо-католицької церкви і щодо ситуації на Волині, і щодо ширшого контексту українсько-польського примирення. Я думаю, що ще в гіршій ситуації знаходяться українські церкви, чи церкви, які є в Україні, так, деякі з яких просто є обтяжені цією столітньою традицією симфонії, де вони дуже чітко слідують у фарватері влади, деякі пробують, так би мовити, з нього вирватися, але їм це не завжди вдається, тому мені здається, що якраз розбудова громадянського суспільства і посилення цих тенденцій, які в Україні є, які відзначав професор Казанова, що це розмаїття, воно сприяє тому, що церкви в Україні є частиною більше громадянського суспільства, ніж політичних структур, що з часом це буде сприяти і їхній більшій ролі у таких процесах, про які ми говоримо, процесах примирення. Тобто моя думка не, так би мовити, конфесійний характер тієї чи іншої спільноти є визначальним, а є, так би мовити, визначальним є її місце в громадянському суспільстві і досвід, так би мовити, поведінки в цьому суспільстві, яка та чи інша спільнота має. Дякую.
Do I have to respond? Yes, you may comment if you like. I think you have said just what I would have said if I had more time, so thank you. And I'm still saying that this is a product of historical circumstances. I don't think that there are some theological grounds for these phenomena that some churches foster and some become obstacles for peace building. What you have said, alas, in Eastern churches, there is more tendency for symphony with the power, and that's why the church has no voice of itself. Unfortunately, this is probably the most typical characteristic of post-Soviet area churches. I don't know these churches that you mentioned in Poland, but why do you think, which role played Archbishop Jaworski? I think the key role. Without him, we wouldn't have this reconciliation. He was he belonged to the circle of John Paul II, and this is the tradition that is marginalized at the moment. I mean, attitude to Tischner, I mean, the production of Znak, I mean, the activity of Gedroids. There is a bad joke that Polish church loved John Paul II, but if it was in its power to elect him, she would have not probably elected him. The big number of the faithful in the Polish churches, in Roman Catholic Polish Church in Przemysl somehow did not contribute to reconciliation between Ukrainians and Poles there. But I think we can impact this. I'm not saying that there is no chance in our space of Ukraine. I'm just saying that our reconciliation will take much more time. I don't think it will be as fast as it was in the case of Western post-war world. Thank you very much. Stephen from Hakima University, and then Professor Piotr Kopitz will be next.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll speak in English. First, I would like to say thank you for this opportunity and also for the sentiments of Yaroslav. Thank you for the insights. And I would just like to share about reconciliation from the perspective of Kenya in the African context. First, the value of reconciliation was very instrumental. If you look at the South Africa and apartheid. And I can say that religion played a major role, led by Desmond Tutu. And in the context of Kenya, I think just to give you to share my experience is that during post-election violence of Kenya 2007-2008, the church played a major role on issues on reconciliation. And we had some massacres that happened in the past. And realize that when we are talking about reconciliation, we have to talk about truth and things like maybe confessions, which have to come up. And just as someone has mentioned, that Raslav has mentioned about the memories. Sometimes when this Kenya Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission was formed, they really got some critical findings, which were very emotional, and there was fear that they could arouse some past bitter experiences from the government, because government played a major role on issues of massacre. So the state was there. So my question is, how relevant should maybe reconciliation come or maybe take an effect? So under which context? Because you mentioned about memories, and sometimes memories are very bitter and they can erode some emotion which can especially if it affected one of ethnic communities or one tribe or one region. So in the context of maybe making reconciliation to work, I just want to listen from how Ukraine or how Eastern Europe is working. So under which context then, how then do we draw the line that are we ready? Is the society or the community ready to accept issues of reconciliation and to accept the hard truth that this is it? So I would like to listen from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It was very interesting to listen to your comments, because I believe the African experience is extremely important. The most important, the South African experience and the role of the Desmond Tutu and his commission and the whole idea of the restorative justice. I believe this is the experience that we should look very closely at when we're talking about Donbass issue, because I believe this is probably the formula which could be the best applied nowadays in Ukraine. But coming to your question, wish I knew the answer, so to say. I just could refer to literature. There is a huge literature on this subject, and basically this says that you have to do very simple things when you try to come to many historical memories. First, you have to leave the ideological loaded discourses, which talk about the nation, state, national interests, patriotic duties, and things like that. You have to start telling very simple stories from below. Stories of the people, mostly of the victims, what happened to them, so to say. So basically, the recipe is the same. The approach from below works much better than approach from above. And then you also have to, when talking about approach from above, there's also certain mechanism which our countries are not ready to follow. This is, you have just to work with the textbooks. You have to read the textbook of the other sides and to make some kind of amendments. Therefore, we have to say, you have to found a joint commission by the, say, Polish and Ukrainian historian. Better so if they wrote a joint textbook, so to say. But basically what I'm talking there, this is feasible. This is feasible. It can be done. The crucial issue is a political will on the both sides to do these very simple things. And if the state doesn't want to do this, then civil society has this probably no duty, whatever obligation to start these processes from below. But basically, this is minimum that I could tell under these circumstances.
Дуже дякую, професор Копєц з Католицького університету Любліна. Професор Копєц проведе цілий вебінар в рамках проекту на тему польсько-німецького примирення. Але зараз з нього питання. Пьотр.
Дякую за цю можливість, пробачте.
Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this discussion. Thank you very much. I will be switching into English because I don't think that my Ukrainian allows me to speak freely.
Professor, many thanks for your presentation, for your reflections and statements. And I fully agree with your statements concerning the future of reconciliation and ways of reconciliation. Perhaps your picture of the Polish Catholic Church is perhaps, I do believe, too pessimistic, but let's put this apart. Okay, so I would like just two short comments, to give two short comments. First, it is really true, and I could observe it also in the Polish conditions, in even local area, that the reconciliation now is rather the question, the case of grassroots, and from the grassroots, and not from up, but from below, and this somehow relates to the next, and also your statements, or your reflection, observation, that the role of the churches and further ecumenical relations is very important. But now I have impression that in Poland, also in whole Europe, I think, ecumenism and ecumenical questions, or rather in the, let's say, lower condition than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Just to mention that we're still waiting for the next, for instance, ecumenical European Ecumenical Days. Last time it was in Sibiu, 2007 perhaps, or 8. So it somehow shows us how far we are from this ecumenical optimism from 20 or 30 years ago. But still, the next thing is that, for instance, concerning the Polish and German reconciliation, when we look at the past and this famous we forgive and we ask for forgiveness, it was the question of the small group within the church, or even of leaders within the church. I would like to mention the role of Archbishop Nosol and of a certain group of theologians also from the Catholic University in Lublin. But still, at that time, it was the task of small groups. And I think we are in the same place right now. This is reconciliation is a task of small group of, let's call them reconciliation elites. And I think it is very important. So it is also a question, a sort of ambiguity, because on the one hand, it is very negative or pessimistic remark, because a small group or not so in power or in charge as the whole church. But on the other hand, it shows the history of the Polish and German reconciliation, prove and confirm that the role of allies, of leaders, is so important that we somehow have to support with this history, have to have support in this history. And so so this is just a remark, and I would like to ask you, what do you think about this position of leaders, of particular leaders or particular small group of reconciliation, and what is their role within the churches, for instance, within the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine? Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie profesorze, ale ja będzie też powiedzieć
Thank you very much, Professor. I will also speak in English.
My comments on your comments. First of all, I would like to apologize if I make some kind of the bad use of the bad image of the Catholic Church. I didn't mean to say that. Just to say. I'm just saying, but let's put it this way: that in both our churches, in your church, Roman Catholic Church, and in our Greek Catholic Church, the situation is worse than it used to be.
Yes, it's true.
And I could name Ukrainian bishop that also against reconciliation, even so they never admitted overtly. I know what they're talking privately, so to say. So basically, we were actually rather happy some 10, 20 years ago that we have such a leaders of the church as John Paul on the Polish side, or Jaworski on the Polish side, and Kuhuzar on the other side. We were just, this was a couple of unique situations, but the issue is that we use it. Secondly, I believe that what you're saying confirms my point, that into the sense that the milieu of John Paul II is largely a milieu of Krakow and Lublin, Catholic, Kul, State Lubelski. Because basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Kul is the only has been the only non-state university in the whole communist Europe.
Yes, it's
not
true.
even Catholic, but non-state university.
It is partly state, partly.
It played immeasurable. Yeah, it just the role could be compared, but there's nothing to compare to this, because this was a unique university to say, and in this sphere. And also, talking about Polish-German reconciliation, I believe you will tell your webinar, was also this context of the Second Vatican. Probably without Second Vatican, would hardly this Polish-German reconciliation would happen. But I believe that we are talking here in the same tune, that the station is worse than it used to be. It's dramatical, but not, say, tragical. There's something space for reconciliation. And probably the silver shining along this cloudy station is that reconciliation always has been initiated by the marginals, by the intellectually marginals. Jerzy Giedroyc, who would listen to him? He was despised by the Polish diaspora. But nowadays, looking for perspective 70 years later, he proved to be the most important figure, even so he's very marginalized. So I believe this is some truth, some message to all of us, that importance of the thing that we are doing. Because basically, reconciliation was quite often initiated against the view of the majority of the situation. And since the church is also a majority of society, and since the church is also part of society, it also affects the churches, so to say. So this is, I believe, why this initiative of the Catholic University in Ukraine is very important. I'm very happy that Polish Catholic University in Lublin joins because it gives some space for the optimism.
Thank you for so much, Professor. Yeah, I completely agree with you with this position, and let's hope the future will be better also in our relationship. Thank you.
Thank you.
Окей, питання від Діани Михайлової Качині, якщо я правильно вимовив. І це буде
question from Diana, and it will be the last question. We are unfortunately running out of time. Diana, the floor is yours. I'm welcoming everyone. Nice to see all of you. I'm happy to be among such honored people. Professor Hrycak, thank you for your presentation. And I also want to express my gratitude to our foreign partners. Your political elites voted for the Ukrainian, for the resolution and supported the Ukrainian integrity and territorial integrity and sovereignty. And talking about the conflict, how to solve the conflict that appeared after 2014, from the point of view of the institution of church, I would like to underline that our country is so multi-ethnic, multinational, and multi-religious that it's very significant to separate the solution of this conflict into two parts: deoccupation and reintegration of the eastern territories. It should be solved in one platform, and the return of Crimea should be solved another platform. When we speak about religion, by the way, we are the only country in Central Europe that has its native residents, native citizens, the Muslim people. So our Crimean Tatars identity can become an additional diplomatic tool on the level of political diplomacy. For instance, some leaders of Muslim Tatars can be engaged in government. Leaders of religious communities can become members of certain commissions for human rights, for justice, and for the establishment of the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. So my idea is that if our guests could comment somehow on this, I would be only grateful. Can I reply or comment very briefly? It's a very significant comment as for a Ukrainian. Very few people pay attention to the fact that Ukraine has problems with Islam, or Islam does not have problems with Ukraine. If we compare Ukrainian situation with the European situation, you can see this big gap. this difference. We don't need to reconcile with Crimean Tatars, luckily, because this reconciliation just happened de facto. Of course, Islam has many different branches, just like Christianity does. So this is a gift from destiny that our Crimean Tatars represent the liberal face of Islam. And we have to cherish this. We have to be aware of this. I don't know to what extent is the participation of our Crimean Tatars colleagues in the process of reconciliation, but I think this is another story that gives us ground for slight, maybe still hesitating, but optimism for Ukrainian reconciliation. Mr. Yaroslav, thank you for your replies and for your comments, and thanks to all the participants of our discussion. I also would like to greet Professor Gerard Covers from the University of Notre Dame in the United States of America. Professor Powers will have his lecture tomorrow at the same time at 5 p.m. by Ukrainian time. Professor Powers is the director of the Catholic Center for Peacebuilding and Catholic Peacebuilding Networks in the United States. He has experience of peacebuilding in Asia, in Latin America, and in Europe. We have run out of time for today. After the brief break, I think we can take roughly 10 minutes and come back. I mean, the participants of the closed meeting that was supposed to start at 6. Let's start it at 6:15 p.m. so that we have some 10 minutes for break. Who has to participate in the closed discussion? Please, Paulina, join Zoom in 10 minutes. I would please use the link and join us in 10 minutes. All the rest, I'm grateful to you for your presence, and please, you are welcome tomorrow the same time, 5 p.m. If someone of you who are staying for the closed meeting today has not received the link, please write to Irena Kitura, and Irena Kitura will send you the link. And so maybe I will also give mail to Irena Kitura in the chat in case if you don't have her email. And please check your email box. Irena will send you the link. Thank you for your attention. Thanks to Konrad-Adenauer Foundation and Professor Hrycak. So see you tomorrow, and to the rest, see you in 10 minutes. In the chat, you can see email by from Irena Kitura. So the technical support, please do not leave, do not end the session, so that our participants could copy, paste this email. Thank you very much.